Choosing the right potting mix matters a lot more than you might think. While it might be tempting to just go to your gardening store and grab whatever bag of potting mix that you come across and just use it for your plants, you might want to double think that strategy because there's a few reasons why you might want to consider making your own potting mix. And we're going to talk about how you can decide what potting mix you should use and what mixture you should use for your particular situation. Hey guys, it's Joe here, coming at you with another video from Hermit Garden. And in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about potting mixes and how you can decide what mixtures you should use for your own indoor plants. So let's get right into it. So when it comes to deciding what type of potting mixture you want to use, there's three main things that you want to consider. So the first one is what base you're going to use, and that's the material that's going to is how much drainage component you want to add to your potting mix. And the third component is the nutrition component. How much nutrients do you want to actually give your plants? With an understanding of those three components, you'll be well equipped to decide what type of potting mix you want to use for your own plants, and you'll have a good idea of how you should make your own potting mix. So let's start by talking about the moisture component, or the base. So the base is the material that's going to hold on to all the moisture that's going to be in your potting mix. So two popular options that people like to use for the base is peat moss and coco coir. Those are going to be the two main ones that I'm going to recommend you to try out for yourself because those have been tested and proven to be successful for most people. So how to decide between peat moss and coco coir? It ultimately comes down to a matter of preference. There's like certain pros and cons to each. With peat moss, there's a couple advantages. One is it provides a little bit of nutrients for your plants, while coco coir doesn't really provide any nutrients for your plants. And it's also a little bit cheaper and a little bit easier to get your hands on at most gardening stores. Coco coir, on the other hand, is a little bit better at retaining that moisture that you want. And it might be better if you're trying to go for some kind of hydroponic situation where you're just trickling a little bit of water to your plants. Coco coir might hold on to water a little bit better than peat moss. The other factor that a lot of people want to think about is the environmental impact. So there's a little bit of a difference between peat moss and coco coir in terms of where they come from. So peat moss comes from these bogs. Peat moss is essentially decayed moss that has been buried for a long period of time and has decomposed into this mushy material that you can use for your houseplants or for your soil. And peat moss is mined from these bogs and shipped out to whoever wants to buy it. Coco coir, on the other hand, comes directly from coconut husks. So essentially the coconut husk is taken from these coconuts. Essentially it's the part that would go to waste otherwise. They just scrape it off of the coconut husk, shred it up, process it, and then ship it out to their customers. In terms of which one is a little bit more environmentally friendly, there's some arguments to be made for both. So with coconut coir, the advantage with that is you don't have to mine it out from a bog to get it. So you're not causing any environmental destruction by mining this material out from natural resources. One of the disadvantages with coconut coir is that it uses up a lot of water to create coconut. And so in certain areas like India, where water is a scarce resource, that can be considered a little bit of a problem for them. You also want to consider the worker environment. So when it comes to processing coconut husks, a lot of workers are overseas in these areas where there's not a lot of labor conditions, where the labor conditions aren't that great. And so processing the coconut husks will actually generate a lot of dust, and that can result in poor working conditions for the workers who have to process it. On top of that, when you're processing the coconut husk, there's a lot of input chemicals that have to go in, and then there's a lot of waste chemicals that are generated. And so that can be another factor you want to consider. So while coconut coir seems like a good alternative to peat moss because it's essentially like you're using a waste product and reusing it for your soil, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's like some downsides to doing that. So whether you decide to use peat moss and contribute to depleting bog ecosystems, or you want to use coconut coir where you're possibly contributing to poor working conditions for laborers in India, that's entirely up to you. There's no really clear-cut answer as to which one is going to be better or which one is optimally sustainable. What you choose is entirely up to you, and no one's going to accuse you of doing wrong for picking one over the other. But I will say one advantage that peat moss has over coconut coir is it's a little bit cheaper. So if you don't care about the environment and you just want to save money, then go with peat moss. So coming back from that long tangent, let's get back to talking about potting mix. So the second component that you want to think about using for your potting mix is the drainage component. So the drainage component is essentially these large chunks that you're going to add to your soil that's going to allow water to flow through your soil instead of collecting in your soil and creating some kind of muddy mess that you don't want to deal with. So other than clumping, it also helps prevent overwatering a little bit, because if excess water can drain through the soil instead of getting caught up in the soil, that's going to allow your plants to have a little bit of air to breathe rather than being suffocated by all the water in this muddy mixture that you would have otherwise. So with drainage component, there's two main materials that people use. So one is perlite and the other is vermiculite. You can also consider using something like orchid bark, and that's another option that some people like to use. With the drainage component, there's not too much to say about it. I would say just pick whatever one is available to you, whichever one is cheapest. The third factor you might want to think about is the nutrient component to your potting mix. So with the base material, you're just not going to get as much nutrients as you would like for your plants. Either with peat moss or coco coir, you're just not going to have enough nutrients for your plants to grow and thrive as you might want it to. So that's where the nutrient component comes in. There's a couple of options that people use for the nutrient component. So the first one is worm castings. So worm casting is essentially worm poop. You can get it at most gardening stores. You should find it pretty easily. And you'll just add that to your potting mix just with all the other components. You can also consider using compost. That's another option that's going to be a little bit cheaper, and it might be something that you have already available from the compost that you already have at home. So the thing with worm castings, why you might want to choose compost over worm castings, is that worm castings can be a little bit variable in the quality. You might not be sure that you're getting enough nutrients that you want, and sometimes the texture might not be exactly what you're looking for. Compost is also probably going to be cheaper for you than going out and buying worm castings. But worm castings can be great if you just want something that you're for sure you know it's going to work. There's a good chance it's going to work for you versus whatever you have in your compost. You have no idea what that is or if that's going to be good for your plants. So now let's start talking about the mixture. How do you decide how much of each component you're going to add to your potting mix? How much moisture holding material, how much nutrients, how much drainage material, how much are you supposed to put into a potting mix? So of course the obvious answer to that is it depends, but if you have no idea what you're doing, you have no idea where to start, my recommendation is to go with a 50-30-10 mixture. So what I mean by that is you're going to have 50% base material, 30% drainage material, and 10% nutrient component. And that's going to give you a good starting point to start experimenting and have a rough idea of how that mixture is going to work for your particular situation. So now let's talk about that it depends part. What it really depends on is your particular plant's preferences. And what I mean by that is certain plants will want to have more moisture, some plants will want to have less moisture, some plants want to have more nutrients, and others want less nutrients. And using that kind of rough rule of thumb, that's going to help you decide how much of each component you should add to your potting mix. So let me just throw in a little disclaimer here with the numbers in the potting mix. Those numbers are really rough rules of thumb. You have a lot of flexibility when it comes to fiddling around with those numbers. It's not like if you change it by 1%, it's going to drastically have a huge difference on your plant's health. There's really a lot of room for experimentation here. So if you have a plant that really loves moisture, doesn't need a lot of nutrients, like you're growing carnivorous plants, those type of plants really love low nutrient conditions and a lot of moisture, then in that case you would want to have a lot of base material or maybe none at all of the nutrient component. So you could do something like 90% base material, 10% drainage material, and that might work for your particular plant. On the other end, you have succulents. They don't like to have a lot of moisture. They don't need to be watered that much. I think they don't need that much nutrients. So for those particular plants, you might want to go with a 20% base material and an 80% drainage material. That might be a little bit extreme, but that might be a good starting point for you. And the other factor you might want to think about is how much are you watering your plants? If you love to water your plants every day as part of your routine, you just want to give it a whole bunch of water, a whole bunch of love, then maybe you want to be a little bit more heavy on the drainage material component. On the other hand, if you're a little bit more hands-off, you don't want to have to do all that work of watering your plants, you just want to do it occasionally, like once every few weeks, then maybe you want to put in a little bit more base material than the drainage material, and that will hold on to the water a little bit longer to last them through those periods of not watering. But if you're a complete beginner and that all of that sounded like mumbo jumbo, you had no idea what I was talking about, just go with a 50, 30, 10 mixture of base material, drainage material, and nutrients, and that'll probably work for you. So let's talk a little bit about store-bought potting mixes. So most stores will give you the option of purchasing pre-made potting mixes, no mixing necessary, just use it for your plants. And that's another option that you can use. I've actually used it myself for my own terrariums, and I've found pretty good success with that. So potting mixes that are pre-made, bought from the store, that is a viable option for you. The only consideration I have for that would be you just have a little bit less information about what you're giving your plants and what's in the potting mixture. I know they give a little bit of a description of what's in there, but maybe there's a little bit more of a comfort to you knowing that you made it yourself. You know exactly what's in there, what you're giving to your plants. So just having something that you've made yourself rather than something that's bought from the store might give you a little bit of comfort knowing that you know exactly what you're giving your plants. You know the exact mixture, the exact components, all of that is in your plants, and that can help you decide how your plant is doing and give your plants more specialized, more tailored, individualized care. And that can be an advantage over buying store-bought potting mixes. And that's especially true, especially if you're comparing it to something like just grabbing dirt from your backyard or out from nature. With that type of soil, just scooping it out from the ground out in the woods or something, you just have no idea what's in that soil, and you have no idea what the nutrient component is like, or if it's even going to be compatible with your plants. There could be diseases in there, pests that you don't know about, and you're just not sure if that soil even has enough nutrients to sustain a plant. But that can be an option if you want to go for a more natural solution. You want to just grab plants from nature, from your local park or something. Maybe you want to just pick soil that you know works for them, so it's probably going to work with those plants in nature if you bring it home. So I think that pretty much sums up this video. So just to recap, if you want to make your own potting mix, get a base material, a drainage material, and nutrient material, and that will get you most of the way there. And you can always mix and match the amounts of each component you want to use in your potting mix. That's entirely up to you, and there's a lot of flexibility there with what mixtures you want to use for your particular house plants. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, if you learned something new, feel free to give this video a like, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.